So we're on Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis. We'll count down from the top of the Amud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. And the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. And we're talking about a woman whose Sarah and her husband went out to Medina Sayyam. And the Mishnah paskins lo tinase v'lo tisyavem acheteda shema muberes hi tzarasa. So there's no possibility of nefila for yibum, because perhaps the muberes, perhaps the tzara is muberes. So the Gemara asks, Uli Olam, does that mean she can never get married? It could be that even if we assume that the tzara is muberes, in the worst case scenario, just give a chalitza. On the tzad that the tzara is not muberes, so she falls for yibum. But we can't allow yibum because maybe the tzara is muberes. But why don't we just cover our bases with chalitza? And then certainly she'd get married. I mean, the Mishnah says that she can't get married. Why not chalitza? We don't lose anything by chalitza. Amar Zeiri, he says, we have to reinterpret the Mishnah. So we're going to soon see Rabbi Hanina. He's going to take the Mishnah literally the way we understood it, but Zeiri reinterprets the Mishnah. And what does it say? What does it mean when it says lo tinase? It doesn't mean lo tinase li ola, but rather li atzma. In other words, let's say, for example, there is no tzara. And now the question is whether or not she would fall for yibum. She doesn't have any children, but maybe she's pregnant. And shlosha chadashim. So in terms of a situation where there is no tzara, she has to wait 3 months, and then she knows that she's not pregnant because, right, then it's heker ibura with after 3 months. Once she sees that she's not pregnant, then she falls for yibum. So that's a case of vadai lo nisabra. For sure she's not pregnant, and this will determine after three months. Now here in the Masechet, he adds another element here called lo plug. He says that she has to wait 3 months after the death of the husband because she might be pregnant. He says, what about a case where we know she's definitely not pregnant? Let's say the husband is out of the city limits, or she's older, past childbearing age. She still would have to wait 3 months because of a lo plug. Now we get to lechavrata, the case where she has a tzara. Maybe the chavrata, the tzara, gave birth. Tisha chadash. What does that mean? That we'll wait 9 months, and if the tzara was pregnant, then she would definitely give birth. And then there would be no need for chalitza because there would be no zika, no nefila for yibum. But after 9 months, choletzes mimonavshach. If the tzara is not muberes and she needs chalitza, there is a zika yibum, because her late husband left this world without any children, then here we have a chalitza. And if we assume that the tzara is muberes, okay, fine. So she really is muteres lashuk even without chalitza, but we don't lose anything by requiring chalitza. So when the Mishnah says lo tinase, says Zeiri, we're talking about 9 months. Rab Chanina Omer li atzma shlosha, but ulechavrata liola. Now, it's on the one hand, Rab Chanina agrees that if there is no tzara in the picture, then she waits 3 months to make sure she's not pregnant, and will apply the lo plug. But as far as lechavrata, the case where there is a tzara, here's where Rab Chanina disagrees with the interpretation of Zeiri. And he says the following. It could be that the tzara out there, Medina Sayyam, became pregnant and gave birth. And we're not going to let this woman who's here, the tzara that's here locally, marry at all. So we're taking the Mishnah literally, that lecharita liolam, meaning lo tinasi liolam, and there's no allowance for chalitza. So Gemara says, "V'tachlos minoresha." What are you nervous about, Rabbi Chanina? What do you lose by a chalitza? And the Gemara now tries to interpret Rabbi Chanina. Abai bar Ovin, Rabbi Chanina bar Ovin, Amri Chavayu. What is the underlying logic of Rabbi Chanina to prohibit chalitza? Gzeira shem yehev vlad ben kayoma. Perhaps the tzara will give birth to a Vlad Kayoma. There's no yibum, no need for chalitza, and now you're gonna have to make a cruise, put out on social media. Hey, she's allowed to marry a Kohen because the chalitza was meaningless. So the Gemara says v'litzcha. So what do you lose by sending out this cruise? Dilma ika dahavi bechalitza v'havi b'achraza. There may be individuals who are present at the time of the chalitza, and they think that she's not allowed to marry a Kohen because she's a chalutza. Chalutza is prohibited to a Kohen. V'lo avi b'achraza. And they won't be there to hear the announcement that she's muteres l'kun. And then they'll see, wait a minute, she's getting married to a Kohen. The chief rabbi is marrying her off to a Kohen. They'll come to the conclusion to kashari chalutza l'kohen, that a chalutza is allowed to marry a Kohen. After all, the Torah doesn't prohibit a chalutza from marrying a Kohen. It's only rabbinic. So the Gemara now is going to raise an objection from the Mishnah. And we're going to try to prove from the Mishnah that this idea that we have to worry about a chalitza and make a achraza, and we can't do so because if the chalitza is betos, there'll be people who were at the chalitza, but they won't be at the cruise. All this is against the Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah back on Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amud Beis that a woman who goes off with her husband to Medina Sayyam, there were no children, and now she comes back and she says, Nitan li ben b'Medina Sayyam. I had a child in Medina Sayyam. I don't know where the child is. That's a different question. But V'yomra, now there are two possible scenarios in her testimony. She can either testify that she falls for Yibum or that she doesn't fall for Yibum. In the first case here in the Mishnah, what does she claim? Omra meis b'ni v'achakach meis bailu, which means that I fall for Yibum. Nemenis, and we believe her because she's only strengthening the chazaka that we started with. Our original assumption was that she would fall for Yibum in event that her husband died because she doesn't have any children. She's claiming, all right, I admit I had a child, and that would exclude Yibum, but that child unfortunately perished before my husband perished. So by the time of my husband's demise, at that point there were no children, and therefore I fall for Yibum, and she's believed. Now we have the flip case. She says, Meis Baili, v'achakach b'ni. So that means that there is no nefila for Yibum, because I went out to Medina Sayyam, I had a child, and the child survived my husband. And now basically what she's saying is that there's no zikas Yibum, I have a child from my husband, and I can marry anyone in the shuk. Eino nemenis. Here she's not believed because she's undermining the original chazaka, which was that she falls for Yibum. And now she wants to say, no, there's no nefila for Yibum. And the reason for that is that I had a child and he survived my husband. And however, we are choshesh that maybe she's telling the truth. So on the one hand, we're not going to trust her to allow Yibum. No, excuse me. We're not going to trust her to allow her to get married lashuk, based on the fact that she claims she had a child, etc., and there was no zikas yibum. So we're really going to be choshish that maybe there isn't a fila for yibum. However, choshishin l'dvareha, meaning that she cannot have yibum with the surviving brother of her husband, because we have to worry that maybe it's possible she is fabricating the truth, and we go back to the original chazaka that she falls for yibum. But on the other hand, we have to be choshish, maybe she is telling the truth. And if she is telling the truth, and in fact there's no zikas yibum, and here we have a case of an eishes ach erva without the mitzvah of yibum. On the other hand, she needs chalitza, because maybe she's not telling the truth, and her son, if she had one at all, died before her husband. We go back to the original chazaka, there is a zikas yibum, and therefore she needs chalitza. But again, it's going to be a chalitza of safek. So the Gemara asks the following question. This is a question of Rabbi Chanina. V'leichus dilma asu eda v'amri kidika amra. I mean, after all, she is claiming that her son survived her husband, and that might be a true claim. We don't know that she's falsifying the truth. Now, if it's a true claim, that her son survived her husband, then the chalitza was a chalitza v'telu mevutelis. It was totally meaningless. If that matzricha proved, you're going to have to go out and notify the Kohanim that they're allowed to marry this woman because the chalitza was meaningless. And why don't we institute the gzeira that maybe there would be people at the cruise, but not people, people at the chalitza, but not at the cruise. And the Gemara rejects this. Amar Papa, the Grusha. The Mishnah is talking about a case of a woman who, before she got married to this man that died, she had been married in a previous marriage to a man that gave her a get. And therefore, she's already psula lakuna. So we're not going to be inhibited about chalitza one way or the other. They will know, they won't know. Everybody knows that she's psula lakuna. There's not even a havamina. She was a grusha. And now we have an alternative answer. Reb Chia Bereder of Hunamar, the Amra Aniva Hu Nechbenu B'Ma'ara. My husband and I were hidden in a cave, and that's where he died. There was no other man with us, and there were no Eidim who could possibly come and testify to support her testimony that her husband died. We have no chashash of Eidim. And therefore, according to this interpretation of Chia, when she claims that her son survived her husband, and therefore there's no zikas yibum, we're going to require chalitza mitzad safek, because we're choshesh, maybe she's not telling the truth. But to say that we'll find out later that the chalitza, in fact, was a chalitza miuteres, but betelo mevuteles, because the Eidim are going to testify that her son survived her husband, that we're not even going to raise that possibility, and we're not going to suspect and worry about the possibility that we'll find out later on that this chalitza was a meaningless chalitza when the Eidim come, because there are no Eidim, and there won't be any Eidim. And this leads us to the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yutes Amud Beis. Now, there are a number of introductions to this Mishnah. First of all, there are 5 ladies that are not believed to testify, Meis Bala Shalponi, to be mater, this woman for Yibu. And they are Chamosa, Bas Chamosa, Tzarasa, Yevimta, Bas Baila Mishacheres. We're going to focus our attention on Tzarasa. So what the Mishnah is going to tell us, well, actually, we had this already in the Mishnah earlier on Daf Kuf Yud Zayin, that if there are 2 tsaros and one tsara testifies that the husband died, we're not going to believe her as far as the other tzara is concerned. She might believe for herself, but not for the tzara. Now, in addition, another important point in this introduction is to review the Machlokas Shin Rav Hamnuna and Shmuel back on Daf Tzadi Vav. And Shmuel's of the opinion that a Shomeres Yavam Zinsa has the same status as an Eishes Isha Zinsa, with all the kilkulim that we're going to impose upon her if indeed her Yavam is a lie. And Shmuel rejects this. He disagrees with Rav Hamnuna, and he holds that a Shomeres Yavam is not considered like an Eishes Isha. Okay, now we get that Mishnah. We're talking about Shtei Yevamos. This means it's two women, they're not related to each other, they're both married to brothers. And there are no children. These are called Yevamos. And amongst the ladies who are not trustworthy are tsaros, and Yevamos that will become tsaros, or might become tsaros. And Zuomeres Meis Baili, Vizuomeres Meis Baili. So each one of these two tsaros is claiming that my husband died. They're both married to the same man. Is Zu Asura Mipnei Baila Shel Zu, Vizu Asura Mipnei Baila Shel Zu. Even though each one is believed to say that my husband died, but to be mater her l'shuk, you have to establish that there's no yavam, that her late husband did not leave a brother alive. Well, let's rely on the other edus of Hatzara to the effect that her yavam died. No, the answer is no. We don't trust one tzara to testify on behalf of the other tzara. So again, as far as the edus of each one respectively for vis-a-vis themselves, herself, I should say, that's reliable. But as far as each one, there's no edus about the death of the yavam that's reliable for her based on the edus of Hatzara, which is a really kind of interesting thing. It's what I call Palgina Dibura. There's a relative credibility. When it's relative to the woman herself, we're going to establish that her husband died. And that would mean that the tzara could get remarried, could get married to anyone in the shuk because there is no yavam, he's gone. But no, we're not going to believe the first tzara vis-a-vis the second tzara as far as Misa Sabal, which in this case means Misa Yavam. This, despite the fact that we do believe that testimony existed as far as herself. It's a Palgina Dibur. Now the Mishnah continues with other scenarios. So again, the bottom line is each one of these two ladies is prohibited to marry someone from the shuk because we think that maybe the Yavam is still alive. Next case. Lazu Edim v'lazu ein Edim. One of these two ladies has testimony, two Edim Cherim, who are testifying to the effect that her husband died. Ulazu ein Edim. So let's give them names. Rachel has Edim, and Leah does not. Now, since there are no children, with the death of the husband, Rachel falls for Yibum. Can she rely on the testimony of Leah to the effect that Leah's husband right? I'm sorry, the two women married to two brothers. I may not have said that correctly. But anyway, so to the effect that Leah is testifying that, let's say, Shimon, the brother of Reuven, who's married to Rachel, is gone. But the only problem is that Shimon has no testimony. There's no testimony about Shimon of Edus. There's only the testimony of his former wife. And she's not believed vis-a-vis, meaning Leah's not believed vis-a-vis Rachel. So here's the paradox here. L'zu es sheyesh la edim, the first of the two, let's call her Rachel, she has edim, is Asura. She can't get married because we know she has no children, and we know that there's a Yevamot, or we think there might be a Yevamot. And all this is because Leah did not adduce evidence with two edim to establish that her husband died. Muteres. Paradoxically, the one who doesn't have witnesses to support her, she's muteres. Why? She's believed about herself. Mace Baila. Now she falls for Yibum. But the answer is we have two Adam testifying that the Yovam died. So we might have she's in the clear and she can marry anyone l'shem. Next case. Lazu banim, v'lazu ein banim. Okay, so let's say Rachel has children from her husband Reuven, and there are no witnesses testifying that to the effect that Reuven died. All we have is Rachel's own testimony, but she has children. So if Reuven died, her husband, even if Shimon is still alive, if you're not going to rely on the testimony of Leah, nevertheless, there is no nefil for Yibum because she has children. Eshiyesh banim muteres. She can marry anyone she wants because she's believed l'gabei atzma to establish that her husband died. Eshe'ein la banim. But what about Leah? Leah doesn't have any children. Asura, we can't allow Leah to marry anyone from the Shuk because perhaps Reuven is still alive. And in this particular scenario, Rachel was not able to adduce Edim to testify about the death of her husband Reuven. So the woman who's Ein La Banim is really, as we say in Yiddish, Afkahakta Tzaris, because she may have a Yavam alive, and she has no children. Next case. It's, I think, the fourth case in the Mishnah. So again, you have two women married to two brothers, and they have no children. There are no Edim to testify that these brothers died. But each one of the two ladies is testifying to Meis Baila. Now, in addition to these two husbands, Reuven and Shimon, there are two other brothers, Levi and Yehuda. So here the Mishnah records a machlokas tanoim between the Tanakam and Rabbi Elazar. At this point in time, we're going to establish that these two ladies could fall for Yibum. Because again, each testimony of the two Yevamos respectively is accepted l'gabi that Yevama who testifies. She's believed for herself. And she's claiming Meis Baila. And there are no children. So there will be Yibum. Now here's an interesting question. There'll be Yibum to right? Levi and Yehuda. And now Levi and Yehuda die without children. But wait a minute. We just established that Reuven and Shimon died, and therefore their wives, Rachel and Leah, respectively, fell for Yibum. And now, after the Yibum to Yehuda, to Levi and Yehuda, now we're going to say, wait a minute, maybe Reuven and Shimon are still alive. We just established that Reuven and Shimon were dead. That's why we had Yibum. So Nisyabnu. So the two ladies, Rachel and Leah, were Nisyabim to Levi and Yehuda. Masechet Yevamot, Levi and Yehuda died without children. Asuras li nase. We still think that each one of these two ladies is connected with a zikas yibum. And why is that? Even though we relied on the testimony of each one of these two ladies, of Rachel and Leah, to be matter them for yibum, because each one testified Meis Bailey, and we relied on their testimony. But nevertheless, there are only Nemenis Alat's one. There's, what's her name? Rachel is only believed for herself. And as far as Leah is concerned, she has to be choshesh that maybe Reuven is still alive. So with the death of her husband, we'll call him Levi, she falls for him to Reuven. Where is Reuven on the face of the mouth? Go figure that out. And Rabbi Lazar disagrees. Rabbi Lazar Omer Hova Huchuli Yavamin is Huchul Cholam. She can marry. When I say she, I mean both Rachel and Leah can marry anyone they want. And we're not choshesh that maybe Reuven and Shimon are still alive, and there's a zikas yibum. And why? Because hoil v'huchuli yavamin. And we allowed yibum to take place with Levi and Yehuda. Obviously, we assumed that both Reuven and Shimon had died. The Gemara says, Tano, we have a fifth scenario in the Brisa. Lezu edim ubanim, v'lezu lo edim v'lo banim. One of these two ladies has two witnesses to support her claim that her husband died. However, she has children from the deceased husband. So let's say Rachel was married to Reuven. She had children. Vilazu, when we get to Leah, she doesn't have any edim to testify that Shimon died. But she's believed, as far as herself is concerned, to testify that her husband Shimon died. Lo banim, she has no children. Ishtem mutaros. Both Rachel and Leah could marry the shuk. Why? And they're not zkukos liyibum. The one who has edim to testify that her husband died and she has children, so even if she doesn't have any testimony regarding Shimon, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant because her husband Reuven died and he left children, so she's muteres l'shuk. There's no zikas yibum. So as far as Rachel is concerned, gleich, as we said. Now let's get to Leah. Leah had no edim, so we're relying only on her claim that her husband died. She also has no children. So why is she muteres l'shuk? I mean, maybe there's a Yavam alive, but the answer is that Rachel had already subpoenaed two witnesses to the court to testify that her husband, Reuven, is dead. So therefore, Leah Eshes Shimon is Muteres. She's believed to say that Shimon died, and the Edom are believed to establish that Reuven died. So that's the end of the Mishnah plus the Brisa. And now we go back to the end of the Mishnah, and we analyze the Shita of Rabbi Elazar. So what was the case? Holchu shtem v'nisyabmu, and Mesu Yevamot. And here we have machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar. According to Tanakama, Asur Linas, because for each one of these two girls, let's call them Rachel and Leah, we have to be choshesh that maybe Shimon is alive as a Yavam for Rachel, and Reuven's alive as a Yavam for Leah. And we don't rely on the testimony of each one of these two ladies as far as the Tzara is concerned. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Hoil the Hutru La Yevamim Hutru L'chol Adam. We don't believe that Reuven and Shimon are alive. Says Rabbi Elazar, I'll prove it to you. Even in the absence of Edom, the very fact that we allowed for Yibum, which means that Rachel fell for Yibum to Levi and Leah fell for Yibum to Yehuda, that itself is a result of the fact that we believe that both Reuven died and Shimon died. And the Chacham can't deny that. The facts on the ground are clear. We are certainly allowing for Yibum to Levi and Yehuda because of the assumption that Reuven and Shimon died. Once you assume that Reuven and Shimon died to allow for Yibum, then we're not going to come up with a chashash and dig up the dust from the ground and say, well, wait, maybe Reuven and Shimon are alive. Boy, Rava, my time with Rabbi Elazar. Let's analyze the sheet of Rabbi Elazar, who's mat to these Yevamos after their two husbands died, respectively, to marry anyone in the shuk, and we're not going to be afraid that Reuven and Shimon, the first husbands, are alive. Here's tzad number Aleph of Rava's Suffolk. Perhaps this sheet of Rabbi Eliezer rejects the entire categorization of a tzara as being one of the women who are sonos, who would try to be makalkel the other tzara, and they're not believed. No. Kasavar tzara me'ida lechavrta. And in this tzad, Rav is putting the machlokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Elazar into very fundamental focus. We're talking about basics here. Is the tzara believed as far as the other tzara is concerned? Oh, Dilma, no. Rabbi Elazar would concede to the Tanakama that we're always choshesh in the case of an edus of a tzara. Maybe she's lying and she's doing it to be mekalkel the tzara. However, he disagrees with them, meaning Rabbi Elazar disagrees with the Chacham, even in a case with that very same Yevama who testified already got married off to someone else. So Bezdin gave a chuppah of a kedushin based on her own testimony. That creates facts on the ground. Meaning now that she got remarried based on her own testimony that her husband died, if that testimony is false and her husband in fact is alive and shows up, then she's mikulkeles, which means teite mizu mizu, ve'lem tzubal zuzu, and all the knossos that we learned about. So therefore, we believe that if she went ahead based on a heter of Bezdin and got remarried, then for sure her husband is gone. She would not lie in order to deliberately mess up the tzara when she'll be messing herself up. We're not accepting Thomas Nafshi and Plish. So Gemara Slamai Nafkamina. What's the difference between the two interpretations of the Shita of Rabbi Elazar, which we were vacillating about back and forth? Is there an actual nafkamina?